Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go far enough to say that I've got a disorder.
We will let the listeners comment on that.
Hello and welcome to episode 292 of the Rockstar CMO F'in Marketing Podcast, a proud member of the Marketing Podcast Network. Hope you're well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott, Managing Partner at B2B Tech Advisory, Velocity B. And on this podcast, I chat with a band of marketing chums who share their marketing street knowledge, which I hope will bring out the rockstar marketer in you. This week, Jeff Clark and I discuss our 5 F'in B2B marketing fundamentals, this time through the lens of implementing a B2B buyer's journey, which I hope demonstrates how to put these fundamentals into practice. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back.
After this word.
Marketers, Deborah Eckerling here.
And I'm Keith Smith, and we host the MPN Meta Marketing Show, which is not just another marketing podcast, but the marketing podcast about all the other marketing podcasts.
Podcasts are booming, right? We love them, and people actually listen. They don't scroll, they don't swipe, well, except maybe during the ad breaks.
But here's the secret. With the Marketing Podcast Network, your ads don't make people hit skip. We put your brand on shows that people actually want to hear.
That's right. We match your message with podcasts that make marketing nerds like us perk up and take notes, or at least nod knowingly, pretending they understand.
And don't worry, because we'll deliver your ad naturally. People might even think that we love your brand personally, which of course we totally do, unless it's a veggie smoothie, then maybe not.
If you want your brand heard without making listeners roll their eyes,
head to marketingpodcasts.net and catch marketing fans at work, rest, and play. Seriously, your audience is already listening. Make sure they hear your brand and not our awkward jokes.
Join the conversation, because good ads shouldn't just be tolerated, they should be enjoyed.
Yes!
Tonight on NBC, Jimmy Fallon and Bozeman St. John host the incredible new competition show.
I hired 10 creatives from all walks of life. They will be battling it out to see who can impress the world's biggest brands.
This is a huge opportunity.
This is the battle for the next big idea.
This is not play.
We're spending millions of dollars.
I'm so excited to embark on this adventure with all of you.
May the best idea win!
On Brand with Jimmy Fallon, tonight on NBC.
Welcome Ian to the Rockstar CMO studio.
Thank you very much, mate. How are you doing?
Doing very well. It's actually a beautiful day. We've been having, not to just like run right into the weather, but it's like we've been having somewhat summer-like weather here in early October, which is about to change. So we're going to enjoy today and then move on to some rain.
We had similar yesterday. We had it was so nice, and like we were saying a couple of weeks ago, you just cling on to the end of summer, don't you? And so I sat outside and did some writing because it was just warm enough to still be out there in the sunshine, right? So yeah. But today's just, if you were to picture in your mind a British autumnal day, it's like that, grey.
Awesome. Been there.
Yeah. It's when we have the thing that I liked when I lived there was every day there seemed to be some sort of weather happening. Either it was bright blue or there was always snow or rain really coming down hard, or there was not much, meh weather. It was mostly something happening. Whereas today is just a grey day. It's just like no weather happening.
My mother used to call that a dumb day. This is a dumb day because nothing's happening. And it's not very cheery either. So
no, I find I think I must have what's that sad syndrome, whatever it is, when the sun's
seasonal effectiveness disorder.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go far enough to say that I've got a disorder.
We will let the listeners comment on that.
Splendid, mate. Anyway, let's get back on track with what we're going to talk about. And I wonder if we should do something other than the weather. And we can't really do politics, can we? So let's just stick to the weather.
Religion. Let's do religion.
Religion, yes.
Let's cover all the taboos.
So, best, I can see why we do the weather now. This week, in a similar way that we looked at our 5 F'in fundamentals a couple of weeks ago through the lens of AI in episode 289, we chatted about how we can apply AI to each of our fundamentals, which I think was a pretty good episode, even if I do say so myself, probably because you did most of the thinking. But this week we're doing something similar with the B2B buyer's journey. But this time our 5 we're going to talk about how our 5 fundamentals support implementing our understanding of the buyer's journey and how we implement that into our marketing. As a reminder, and I'm guessing, listener, you probably don't need a reminder because we bang on about this almost every week. Our 5 F'in marketing fundamentals are the Masterplan, the knowledge, the story, the campaign, and the machine. And you can find details of those in our ebook on rockstarcmo.com. And for some mysterious reason, it's under the tab Long Plays, because I think the resources is too boring.
Well, it also has that musical Rockstar feel to it. This is where we jam. We're jamming. We're jamming on the fundamentals.
That might actually be a discussion for the show one time, is like, how far do you lean into that differentiation and how far do you just stay where people expect to find shit, right? So it's like, who knows what a long play is, but hopefully people just click on it out of intrigue. Anyway, this week, rather than one of us being the interviewee and the interviewer, you're going to cover 3 of these, Jeff. I'll cover the other 2 and the conclusion, and we'll kick off with the master plan. But before we do, what say you, Jeff?
Well, I think so. One of the things when we were talking about doing this topic is that the buyer's journey is one of those things that's very easy to talk about in the abstract or theory, which I think we've done over several episodes. But it's hard to put into practice. And so, with all the interactions you have with prospects and customers that you can record, how do you make sense of the journey they're on? And if you're thinking of the buyer journey as your lead and opportunity funnel, which is much easier to track, then you've got problems because, for one, that's not the buyer's view of the world. They're not thinking, oh my gosh, I just entered a lead funnel, I must take the next step. And secondly, your internal processes are typically, linear, single-threaded processes, which again, it's not how buyers and the multiple personas within a buyer, how they operate. So I think this has some practical information for our listeners. And so do you want to start with number 1, the master plan?
Yes. And we do refer to, I had a frog in my throat there. I thought I was going to cough. So hopefully I'll be hold this together until it's time for you to talk. But I like what you're saying there about the practical advice, because we do refer to this as marketing street knowledge. And I think it's easy sometimes for both of us and for anybody, isn't it, who comments on these things, to be operating in that rarefied air of theory, and we've got to get down to practical. So I think that's a really good point. Anyway, yes, the master plan. So this is where, as regular listeners will know, where we define the objectives. And when we talk about the objectives, you let me ride my art hobby horse around, in that I believe that B2B marketing objective is to create awareness, revenue, and trust. It's also about creating, aside from those things, a resource plan, including your people, process, and tech, which are things that you quite often talk about, Jeff, in terms of our operations, right? And I think the interface between the master plan and the buyer's journey is how you are looking at these high-level objectives and what the metrics are that are relevant, and how you overlay those really across each buying stage. So does your overall goals and metrics, how do they overlay onto each buying stage? I know that we always have this challenge, don't we, about whether we should go first with the knowledge or first with the master plan. So we'll talk about the buying stages in a moment and the knowledge part of this. But we often talk about understanding the kind of business you're in. We often talk about the STARS model at this point, right? There's I think if there's we're not going to do a gap analysis, I don't think, in this one, right, Jeff? So
no.
We're covering some of our regular things. We've done art. So in the Rockstar CMO FM bingo card, we've done art. We're now doing the STARS model, which is obviously from the book by Michael Watkins. And this time I wrote down what each of the 5 are, which is startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, and sustained success. So I think it's important to understand what kind of business we're in. And the reason for that is because the relevant metrics that you map across your buying stage, they need to ladder up to what those company goals are. So it might be that if you're a startup, or maybe you're pivoting into a new category, awareness and building trust in that early stage of the buyer's journey will be more important. So it might be okay to sort of, normally we talk about you need to make sure that you're covering the whole buyer's journey, but it may be much more important at this stage of the company's history that you're very focused in those early stages. And if it's sustained success, then we need to put a lot of focus into the existing customer. We need to call this the customer journey and not just the buyer's journey, and make sure we're focused on loyalty and retention and all those things. So that's where I think the buyer's journey and the master plan kind of interact, don't we? Because when you're building the master plan, you won't necessarily know your buyer's journey. So we're going to get onto that bit in a second. And also a good master plan needs some research. So I'm treading your toes a lot here, Jeff, which is not uncommon on this podcast. So let's get to the knowledge. Or have you got anything to add to what I just said?
I would agree. And you sort of mentioned, it's like, when I think about the start model, it's like startup and turnaround are probably as opposite as you could be. And so if you're trying to build awareness in startup mode, where people may not even be aware of the problem you're solving or the problems that they have, versus turnaround, where it's like, oh, they probably have an impression of you, and both prospects and customers have an impression of you that you've got to re-architect. So it's it is the place to start, because everything from here on is going to have a slightly different flavor depending on where you are in that business evolution.
Yeah, I think I love this STARS model, as probably the listeners probably very aware of, because we talk about it so much. But I think that would be a really interesting discussion about the difference between startup and turnarounds, and what you're doing in that awareness and trust kind of stuff, because you do need to build awareness, and the differences in the turnaround is build awareness of what this new thing is rather than what that old thing is. But if you're in a turnaround, there are some things there that were good, and it's kind of choosing which is going to. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here, aren't I? So let's let me
rabbit hole, which we all, that's the other bingo card is rabbit holes that we put on our list of topics for next week.
You're right. Rabbit hole is definitely an entry on the Rockstar CMO FM bingo card. Anyway, sorry, mate. The knowledge.
The knowledge. So the knowledge in this case, it's like one of the pieces of the knowledge is trying to understand, what the buyer's journey looks like, and the I guess the helpful tools is the fact that there's a lot of organizations that have done a lot of work on mapping out what a buyer's journey typically looks like. And actually, I think this topic was sort of prompted by a friend of the show, Carrie Cunningham of Sixth Sense, who posted on LinkedIn their buyer's journey model, which is kind of an expansion of the classic AIDA model, which is not the opera, but is the awareness, interest, desire, and action. So it's kind of all pre-sale to the sale. And so earlier this year, for those who are interested in going back and finding a really good buyer's journey model, we created our AMPed model, because we're into rock music, so therefore we got to talk about AMPs, which is awareness, muse, purchase, engagement, and development. So you may notice that we not only is it a catchier term, but we're including the post initial purchase part of phases, which a lot of organizations, like I can think of, Forrester was one that really ballyhooed that. And so starting with a model, and then trying to think about, okay, how do my which model I'm working with, what's going to sort of map to how my customers operate. And, one of the things that's interesting, which I think was part of Carrie Cunningham's point, is that in the early part of the selection process, which we may call views or is called interest and consideration in other models, that's where 80% of buyers are selecting a vendor at that point. So it's like your awareness engine has got to be humming, and you've got to be able to move people into the next, the musing about your solution to their problem as opposed to somebody else's solution. And so that's one thing that's important to think about when looking at these models. The other is, how strictly do you define target buyers, who are going to have success with your marketing and sales efforts? Because a lot of these models some are very open. Like I think the original AIDA model, which probably was more consumer oriented, is just like there's this gigantic pool out there of people, and they're just kind of becoming aware that they want to buy something. Whereas in B2B, we're finding that it's more important to really define your targets markets and the accounts in those markets up front, really strictly. And then, you pick the model that you think maps to your customer's process. Is it post-purchase? Is post-purchase retention important to you? Do you have long sales cycles with lots of demoing, POC, proof of concepts, and other elements in the steps? Or do you have short, sales cycles? Another thing to consider is, are you aligned with a particular advisory group like a Forrester or Gartner or one-to-one marketing that, you're trying to map because you're working closely with them. You're trying to map the way you're looking at the model with the way they talk about it. But the important thing, and the conclusion of our knowledge part is to pick a model that you think will help take you to the next step.
That's really, I like a couple of really good points you made there, Jeff. One of them is, I hadn't considered that last point you made there, which is absolutely, if you're investing in Gartner or Forrester, you're kind of all in, right? And so if there's going to be a bit of a disconnect if you don't agree with their buying journey, right? Because everything's going to hinge off of that, isn't it? All the advice they give you and all the models they give you is going to hinge off that. So that's interesting. The other one is, I like what you're saying there also about the fact that the buyer isn't spending an equal amount of time in each of the buyer's journey steps, which I think is obvious in a way and not obvious in another way. Because I think when we draw it out, we draw these steps out, don't we? And then we sort of like, well, then somebody goes there and then there's some. But they're, like you say, the muse phase in our model, or the awareness and interest, or the interest and desire model, is, like you say, 80% of the time. So this is, if we haven't got 80% of our focus on that stage, then you're not serving your audience very well. And of course, the challenge with that is we spend so much time and effort, as we've often talked about in customer journeys, in that bit where they appear on our radar, are easy to track in our CRM tools. It's the point at which they've kind of contacted us, and that's way later. That's the last 20%, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's interesting. Yeah, and also I think I said to you off air when we were chatting about Kerry's model, and I like the way you describe him as a friend of the show. I'm not convinced, but he's been on the show. Okay, but I think that
I used to work with him, so he's a
friend of yours,
a friend of mine.
So anyway,
the show can do what we want with. He has been on the show, though, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think was interesting there was. When he published that, I was kind of expecting something a little more avant-garde from Sixth Sense, because they bang on so much about the death of the MQL and all that stuff. I would have thought that their new model would have been awareness, interest, and some other stuff. Really, really focusing on that 80%. Anyway, so again, I've banged on too much. So yeah, the other thing, of course, in that stage of the knowledge is we're also defining our personas, as you point out, and that we need to map them across the buyer's journey, because one of the things we've discussed on the show is that personas will move in and out of the buyer's journey. So it might be that you're serving the finance decision maker, but you're only serving them obviously in the purchase phase. But it might be you need to lay some ground rules for them in terms of ROI tools and stuff during the consideration phase in the earlier stages. So I think that was also what we're doing in the knowledge phase, aren't we, with the buyer's journey?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So next, Ian, is up to you to talk about how the story fits into the buyer, implementing a buyer's journey.
The other thing, I don't know if the listeners notice this stuff, but we always click into the same ones, don't we? I always pick up the story.
Well, yeah, so, the story has to go with our experience. Our experience lends us
that's
to these.
True. Yeah. As my content marketing experience. And I think we met. I was a VP of content marketing. I think so.
That is correct.
It's the very definition of our relationship. So the story, of course, is our content marketing plan. And once we have our plan from our master plan and from the knowledge, we know our buyer personas, and we've decided which of the journeys that we're going to choose, i.e. Forrester's one. Amped, of course. And we're crafting our stories. We need to find what content will be useful to help the buyer move between these stages. And I think that what we've just pointed out is that actually how much effort and emphasis we need to put into different buyer stages depending on the particular buyer's journey of our particular product, but also where we are as a company and where we've got some gaps and what we need to do, where we need to move our audience. So, for example, providing proof content like case studies is going to help somebody move from using our model about the solution to considering a purchase. However, what I was thinking about, and I think this jives well with what we were just now talking about, particularly with the startup and turnaround thing we were just saying, is there's potentially a second journey going on here. So the buyer is obviously hopefully moving towards a purchase. That's one journey. But also our story and our point of view may challenge the status quo or how things have been done. So the change that this buyer is going to need to go through, right? Because we're selling change. So that I think there's an additional journey of moving someone from the current way of thinking, process or solution to our point of view and to our solution. I think we need to sort of overlay that over this, because I think we need to think about that as a buyer's need is like, what are they thinking right now? How are they solving the problem right now? And what do they need to know to move to where we've gone? So, and I'm obviously going down another rabbit hole like I do, Jeff. So, so I'm a fan of so if we get this back on stream, I'm a fan of creating a messaging matrix, and also we create a buffet of content so that people can self-select. So I think that while we are talking about a buyer's journey, and I think you already alluded to this, Jeff, we know it's like a ball of wool, really, isn't it? It's it's not really a linear journey. People are going to dip in, dip out. They're going to move back. They're going to move forwards. And so I think we need to ensure we have an even spread of content across the personas, across the buyer's journey, so that when people find us and they're doing their choose their own adventure, they find the content's going to help them move forward.
And this reminds me of the discussion we had about hidden buyers a few episodes ago, because the hidden buyer who might be a gatekeeper or an influencer on the purchase is often looking for content that uncovers challenges they had not recognized before. And I mean, they're kind of sitting back while whoever's the champion of a solution is doing their due diligence. But they're going to come in, and they probably want to come in with a point of view from whether they're in legal or finance or IT or whatever it is that also challenges the status quo. And, they want to be helpful, hopefully, if we're all on the same team, they want to be helpful to the champion or the decision makers and, help, either support or reframe the thinking that they're having about how to solve this particular problem. So it's really important to be thinking about all the personas, where they are in their decision-making process in terms of the content you create. So, absolutely.
Yeah. And such a good point, Jeff, about the hidden buyer when you're defining your personas. And I think I think we've done an episode on personas, but maybe we should cover that again, maybe. And I don't know, maybe the
Personas 2.0.
Yeah.
Or 3.0, whatever. Whatever.
Yeah, if listeners, you want to get in touch and let us know, then maybe we'll do personas again. But so this moves us on to number 4 of our 5 F'in marketing fundamentals, the campaign. What say you, Jeff?
Well, once you know the stages, your personas, the story you're going to write, the goals you're after, given your master plan, now it's about delivery. So you got to ensure that the tactics, within any campaign effort you have are designed to hit the mark. Obviously engage the prospects or customers out there, and of course you want to be able to measure that they're actually hitting the mark, which again, easier said than done. But this is something that to me is I've often thought is easy in theory, but is really the hardest to get right in practice. And I may regret saying that because actually, listeners, if you think another stage in this is harder, but it's just, it's like, you're trying to serve your story up in different channels, or, what we used to call back when I was at Forrester Serious Decisions, watering holes. Where do they go for content from the perspective of where they are in a buying cycle and what they're particularly buying? And, champions are typically out doing early research on sites or events that are tailored to their community. If they're an IT architect, they're going to Gartner Symposium. If they're a CIO or CFO, they're going to, a CFO leadership forum. Or if they know they're in a particular, buying a particular type of solution, like if it's CRM, they might be going to Dreamforce or QCon. So they're always looking for, information. I know I mentioned mostly events, but it's like there's the events, there's the communities, there's all the content around those. And so, what are they? Are they looking for case studies within their industry peer group? Are they looking for, event presentations on how to address this problem? Are they going on event platforms looking for vendors that solve this? Reviews? Again, are they going back to their analysts? So decision makers are typically talking to their peers or seeing evidence of, your reputation in their community. So they're going to go to their community and say, hey, have you ever heard of, XYZ vendor? And for, it's harder for other personas because, we talked about the hidden buyers, the influencers, the gatekeepers, so that's, that is a challenge in terms of understanding where are they going for their information. And, it's like, sometimes these locations, are not open for your content, and they may not be open for your advertising or news about you. And then, are these watering holes the right place at the right time? Because that might be constantly evolving. So something, again, the reason for obviously measuring whether you're hitting the mark is that the audience may be moving on to some other place to look for their information. And as you go from industry to industry, or it's obviously going to evolve. You can't assume that it's going to be the same as you cover distinct personas within distinct different markets. And that's why testing is absolutely essential to know what's working, not working. Doing campaign reviews, A/B testing. When I was at Forrester and Serious Decisions, we talked a lot about having these demand review teams that with sales and marketing getting together on a regular basis and looking at what's working, what's not working, what's moving people, along the journey, both from an internal perspective and from an external perspective. And the other thing that is important to mention at this point, which we can come back to in the next when we get into the machine, is that there are journey orchestration tools out there that actually help you both from a planning perspective and from a measurement perspective. And they may be in a CRM system like Salesforce, has in their Salesforce Marketing Cloud with Journey Builder. HubSpot's got its Marketing Hub. Adobe Journey Optimizer has its, as a B2B version. We obviously mentioned Sixth Sense, which would play into this area as well. So, thinking about, do I have tools that can actually help us plan and measure whether the tactics we're using to get our story out are working?
Yeah, and I think that I love the demand review idea. I think the challenge with that, of course, is you need data to enter into that discussion, because I think otherwise it just turns into opinion about what's working and what's not working. Now that I've seen that so many times, where I get everything's coming through LinkedIn, and you look at the data and it isn't. But there's such a big perception because it's such a public network that people think, oh, that's the place to be, and that must be what's effective for us. Whereas you find that a different tactic or a different watering hole, as you put it, is the difference. So I think that's really cool. And also the challenge, I think, I like the way that you caveated this about how hard it really is, because it's that bringing all that data together, isn't it? That's the challenge. And then having that conversation with sales and then we're into fucking attribution, and you're like, oh God, So yeah, I think it's a really good point. Yeah. And also, I was also thinking about as well, the point that I made in the notes on this is, I think that we've in these first 4 steps, right, we've got this whole thing mapped out, right? But we do need, we need to do this with sales, right? So in terms of that sort of market education we've got. So there's and the fact that what we've also talked about is the fact the 80% is all done early stage. So buyers are doing this for themselves, and that's being done in the dark funnel. So we need to create a lot of thought leadership, useful how-to content is important. And so all of this campaign bit sits earlier on. The other thing as well, while I'm on the campaign thing, is another bingo card entry is that we didn't discuss defining campaign, which is quite good for us.
Well, I'll give my 30-second. Campaign is the aggregate series of content and tactics, delivery mechanisms that you're using to engage a distinct buying audience that is out trying to solve a problem to a distinct buying need, and that's where you could say we're in the we're in expense automation, market. And it's like, well, yeah, but expense automation is different from public sector to healthcare to, a lot of commercial industries, so therefore, those become kind of like mini campaigns within this kind of broader umbrella. And then if you have another solution out there that is, that maybe is, kind of a sister application that could be to an entirely different buyer. So it's important to be able to distinguish, because again, we're looking at a buyer that's got a set of buying needs, and we're trying to address them. And if you try to do sort of generic content that covers this, not speaking their language, then you're basically going to fail. I hate to say that.
Okay, all right. Let's crack on then, and let's move on to the machine.
Number 5, my favorite category. Well, I shouldn't say it's my favorite category, but I spent a lot of time talking to people about the machine, which is basically the world of operations, whether you want to call it revenue operations, marketing operations, sales operations. It's the people, process, technology part of what we do in marketing and sales. And so, you be able to, align the stages. If we're talking about a buyer's journey, we sort of define cycle stages. It's like, well, how does that align to the systems we have that are tracking all of this engagement? And again, this could be one of the other things that's the hardest part of implementing a buyer's journey, depending on how adaptable the systems are and how adaptable your colleagues in sales are in terms of working with you on it. Because it is, as much as we used to think about, marketing did work first and then sales did work later, and there's certainly some data to support that. But a lot of salespeople are out there, beating the hustings, if you will, before the signals hit marketing. So it's you got to be working this in lockstep, and typically aligning lead and opportunity stages in your marketing automation platforms and your CRMs is one way to track journey progression, but you really got to be able to say, how do those map to what we would think of as from the buyer's perspective, their journey. And as I mentioned earlier, there are, like Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Journey Builder. I mean, there are tools out there that help you do this, do this task, or, customer data platforms, analytic platforms, to kind of track the stage progression from the perspective of the buyer. The caution is that this isn't something like you kind of hard code. We're going to hard code awareness in the muse of the purchase phase into our CRM, because it's like, it's probably easier to say that, these stages, we want to do a mapping in our analytics platforms to say, when internally we're looking at this, an engage or an interaction at this particular stage in our internal process, this is how we can map it to the buyer's journey. So, kind of like early signals, web visits, ad clicks, aligned to awareness, intent signals, keyword searches, website engagement, et cetera, reading ungated content, even, things that pop up as MQLs, that kind of goes to the view stage. The wins, pretty easy, that goes to the purchase stage. But this also leaves a lot of room. I think you even brought this up earlier, that this muse stage, you could even have sub-stages, because if you've got a long sales cycle, there's a lot of musing that can be going on. Yeah. And so you can map, particularly, how somebody goes from a demo or a download onto other, more personal engagement, maybe perhaps with your sales team. So anyway, so this is, as we always note, buying process is not as linear as we like to make it out in theory. So this is a challenge to make sure that your linear processes are actually, you can look at the signals and try to put them on a chart with how the buyer is looking at their process.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, this is absolutely your favorite and your expertise here with the marketing operations stuff. And the point I was wanted to make in the last one as well, which kind of comes into this, is that in the old days, the sales guys in the old days of on-prem and, before the fact that the buyers were doing all of this research themselves, you could just hand the lead to sales and sales would then pick up that sort of marketing, that education piece, right? And they could, because the salespeople were useful to the buyer to get education on the products, but now the buyer knows the products better than the salespeople almost. So, that's the piece. So tracking all of this pre-sale is really important, because that was the bit the sales used to know about, and now they don't know about, right? Because they don't know when somebody's in that education phase. We have to tell them. So I think that's interesting. And of course, your point there about the tight integration of the CRM and deal stages also means that we need a bit of sales enablement around this, because I think one of the biggest challenges sometimes, and you mentioned the MQL word, which is completely out of fashion now, right? Is we need to understand what that actually means, and that sales and marketing agree on what that means. This is just, this is just a contact in our CRM, or is it something more meaningful to sales than that? So we've got to be completely in lockstep. And also, I think that they need to understand the materials and the messaging that we're using in that big 80% thing. So when they pick it up, there's like this consistent story that's being told. So it's a very tight. This is why sales and marketing is getting so tight, I think.
Yeah.
Because of that. Yeah.
And why revenue ops, which is, was sort of a twinkle in somebody's eye 5 or 6 years ago, is now becoming, more prominent,
Absolutely.
more necessary.
Absolutely, yeah. And, I've floated the idea in my Tuesday 2 cents column about the revenue department, that really now that's really how a business needs to look at sales and marketing, isn't it? Is that we have a revenue department, and that's also the rise of the CRO, isn't it? So, that's, again, a rabbit hole for another day there, I think.
What they say about rabbits? They're always making new rabbits. So more things that go in the rabbit hole mean more things will come out.
Well, it just means we keep doing this podcast for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So, all right. So in conclusion, I really like this as a practical activity that brings the 5 fundamentals to life, because I think it's easy to come up with the fundamentals, but we sort of stress test them a little bit with some of these conversations. And also, as you've already said quite wisely, is it's very easy for commentators like us to create this thought leadership, and it doesn't stand up to practical implementation. And it's why I talk about that we share street knowledge, because these hopefully comes across as quite practical. So I like this, mate. So we move on to the last agenda item, which is the song. And you suggested it this week, and it's an absolute classic.
I suggested, I don't know what made me think of this, but it was the song from the Talking Heads in 1985, The Road to Nowhere, which, unlike the title, they say at the very outset, we know what we want and the future is certain. Give us time to work it out. So to me, that was kind of like, I mean, that describes a buyer's journey.
I think so.
And, if they feel like they're on the road to nowhere, it is our job as sales and marketing professionals to make them understand the destination, and it's with us.
Nice. I like it. All right, mate. So I don't think there's any interruptions to our schedule. So you'll be back with us
next week.
Or I'll be back with you. I can't remember how we set this up. I'm in yours.
We will be back together again next week.
All right, mate. I'll see you then.
See you then.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you, Jeff. And yes, we did pick Road to Nowhere for an episode about buyer's journeys. But Jeff is right. The lyrics are a little bit more positive than the title if you listen onto the song. And if you want to connect with Jeff, his Clean Tech Insiders project is now part of my new thing at Velocity B, which you can find at velocity-b.com or by just Googling Velocity B. So that's a wrap on episode 292 of the Rockstar CMO F'in Marketing Podcast. Thanks to Jeff for his insight and to you for putting your dime into our podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. You can find the free, ungated 5 Fundamentals ebook on rockstarcmo.com under long plays. And of course, the full show notes under podcast and links to our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. We'd love to hear from you, especially if you have a suggestion for the show. So please reach out via the website or LinkedIn. Just search Rockstar CMO, or you can contact me directly at hello@rockstarcmo.com. Coming up this week, Friday, I'll be chatting with Robert in our virtual bar, which will drop on Saturday. And Jeff is definitely back in the Rockstar studio next Wednesday. I hope you join us for both of those here at Rockstar CMO FM.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.